I was just wondering if I can sit my water bottle there without causing too many issues, as long as I don't dump it out on the speaker, right? Like,
Yeah, well, you should be good.
cool.
So we're live, so keep your language clean.
Of course, sir. I have never sworn in my entire life. Much less on YouTube. Train. And then, yeah, our sign-in sheets up here. And then it's in the like audio or text that's always here. There's room and then we fill up some stuff. Could be. I was really optimistic and started with a double-sided one, and then I was like, delete Megan. Don't be that person. Yeah, just flip it over and right crooked like we do.
Duffy, can you hear us? Give me a thumbs up. Hear us. All right, thank you, Mike. You're live.
Great. See if my mom can figure it out. She's at home dog sitting for me, so.
Well, that's nice of her.
Yeah, it's a whole scheme. We have a system in place where she can crash at my house anytime she wants to go do pottery, because Uniontown, Damon Barn, her favorite place ever. We call it Dirt Church.
See, Mike, if you were here, you could have food, but we're gonna eat it for you.
I baked brownies. Yeah.
Yeah, by law, I have to fill everything over.
So fun. That's perfect. We'll just copy and paste the YouTube link and send it to
Well,
Shoppo.
You have to either do YouTube, Zoom. I do Zoom and YouTube. And then you also, I recorded that. I did record too. I'm still, this is the fourth YouTube thing I've done, so I mean, we're still brand new. The second one crashed on me. Yeah, October. Well, it came out during came out during. Yeah, it was COVID, but I didn't follow. Were any of you born before 2000? I was 90. You were 90? 83. Quit it? 83? Oh, okay. Cold part.
I remember what you said.
Well, you need to get back to the 70s, late 60s, you might catch it.
Yeah.
Which one?
For some of it. Yeah.
It was fun. Watch keep you out the day and come back.
Yeah. I wonder if you knew something.
Oh, I did. Drank from a lot of bourbon.
Yeah. My mom, who was growing up in Alaska, that was the
Hey,
joke.
you.
It was like, my parents used to say,
Hello.
don't come home till the streetlights come on, but in Alaska, they don't
Hey, you.
come on until like 2 AM. So that's not a good play. As a parent. It's kind of like. I don't like economically, I don't use it. It's so. I spent 4 years trying to get into the architect market, and then I finally got in and then got a job pretty much immediately as soon as I applied to the sound area. So I'm gonna leave where I could definitely get jobs every summer and have a field season that lasts more than like 2 months. Archaeology. Yeah. Which, funnily enough, I didn't dig it all. There's project on, there's a snow road that we rode for putting the route for. Do what's that? It was, yeah, between Barrow and they were putting in a new airport in the town to the south, so everything was coming in to the port and then had to get moved down. It's really only drivable, it's all BLM land, so it's only drivable, it's protecting the system. So snow roads are a big deal. It definitely solidified, like, that's when I knew I was meant to be a historical archaeologist and not the normal archaeologist, because everyone, I was really stoked about all of the old Army Corps, like, oil drums and beer scatters, and like, and everyone else was like, well, like, fun though. It's not fun. Typically, yeah, and there's.
Please sign there, and then there's.
It gets. Yeah, we've started kind of blurring those lines because there's kind of the assumption that the outside of that is kind of like indigenous, and then after indigenous people were on reservations, but that assumes, right, that disappeared from the rest of archaeological space, but they don't. They're everywhere still. So we've started pushing back at those kind of parts from.
What about like basic things?
A little bit.
We still have internet issues, so if I lose you.
So he's up to fire.
Is it a fire now?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for your service.
Hey, Mike, if I lose you, I'll reboot it. If I lose you, I'll reboot it. Okay?
Oh, we're gonna need to give you a bio. You want a bio?
This is Megan. Listen, be educated.
I give a little intro. It's not,
Oh, you can see it.
they pop like, you know, like. I'm also. Realizing for this last year.
Oh, I've had mine since little.
Yeah, I feel like those friends I have been glasses people their whole life.
It's still wild, fine. Hey, someone thought, sign in there. Then. He made it for me. Almond, but lots of fruit over there. Any cheese? I don't have any juice. I do have coffee, but I don't think you do. Okay, all right. Okay, very good. What was it? These three are my most frequent flyers in the library. Every day. Mom gets 5-minute break. Yeah. Just to, one of our counselors, these are her daughters. So. If you another half, is he working?
Oh, he's coming.
Oh, is he coming? Okay. If the poker things don't work, girls, just use your fingers. It's that go.
Yeah. The pile of bricks. Diminish my chance of practice with my.
Good evening. We, Just need to have you guys sign in there, and then we've got refreshments over here, and we'll start here soon.
Oh.
Okay, we have lots of goodies over here and homemade brownies. I know, Elaine, that you'll have to sample them, just saying. Brownies over here, and some goodies. How are
Yeah. A lot bigger.
Where you celebrate? Mike Duffy has joined us from there. Nobody else has been admitted in yet, but just so you know, we're live, so we're recording this as well. So if somebody can't make it, they can watch it later on YouTube. I'll give you the channel for that. The city has a channel now, so you guys can see these. All public meetings will be online. So just give us a couple more minutes, and if everybody else comes, we're gonna get going. Right.
No.
We're gonna get going tonight. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. Part of a little backstory before I introduce Megan. So, as some of you have been here a long time and know a lot more about history than a lot of us, and have lived it here for a while, and I'm hoping we'll engage with Megan tonight. And this is all about education and learning. So when we did some river work during after the floods, part of our memorandum of understanding with the agencies and the tribes was to put together to take all the Woodward artifacts that were here and get them digitalized and gone through, which Megan's been working on with her staff over at University of Idaho, and we'll be getting that all back. But she's working through that process, and part of it also is to do a forum, come to Echo, talk with everybody about the schools, and thank you for coming tonight, Lindsay. And then there'll be some other things that we're going to be doing with the curriculum. So without any further ado, this is Megan Case. She's working on her PhD, and this is her project. And so let's welcome her, and she's been working very hard on this.
Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to work with your community's heritage for my doctoral studies. It's a really great opportunity. I got the email about it and was really excited. So I was really glad to be able to jump on this and work with y'all. And I'm also very excited this evening to be able to share with you some of what we've been working on. There's still a lot that we're getting done, but this is a great little progress report. And as Dave said, a great opportunity to share and educate folks. Oh, I have to be on for work. There we go. So we have a little bit of an agenda to keep us on track. I have pulled together these guiding questions. My hope is by the end of the evening, y'all will have answers to these questions, and we can maybe have some conversations on these topics as well. So we'll start with the basics of what archaeology is and the value of this kind of work within your community as well as beyond, because honestly, it's not like Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider. Sorry, it's not that fun. And then I'm excited to share, like I was saying, some information about the site that's out on the Ramos property. And it's such an important place for shared history and your community is very proud of it, rightfully so. And we've been able to learn about the site from some new documentation that I was able to get a hold of at the state archives. And we're also still learning from the site, which is what's so cool about archaeology. And then there's actually still more to find and more to learn. So we'll get into that. And then finally, we'll go over some of the key guidelines and legislation that help us ensure that archaeological resources like this are preserved for posterity and future generations. And these legal protections also have a benefit to folks. You can get some financial tax breaks and things like that. And if you want to talk about it more, we can, but it's in there just as a blurb. But I think before we get into all the nitty-gritty details, it's important for us to kind of get to know each other. It's a forum, right? That way I know what you actually care about, and I can kind of tailor where we go to address your interests, and you have a bit of an idea of where I'm coming from, because I know I'm some random stranger. And y'all probably know each other pretty well, so I'll go first. As Dave said, my name's Megan Caves. I'm studying to get my PhD at University of Idaho, but I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. And my parents were both elementary school teachers, and I think this definitely made me curious about the world and invested in learning and teaching, because that's still something that I'm doing as part of my doctoral work. My maternal grandmother was an active member of the Yakima Valley Genealogical Society, and she was very invested in me being in organizations like Daughters of the American Revolution and Daughters of Union Veterans, and generally, I think, instilled this love of public history and the Northwest, particularly, because we're from Washington. And then my grandfather was a second-generation nurseryman who grew and planted trees throughout the Yakima Valley. And I think it's kind of fun. My job is this combination of history and digging in the dirt. So that's a fun legacy to carry forward. If folks, just so I can kind of get to know you guys a little bit, if you want to go around and share your name, and maybe if you have family history in Echo, or if there's a local tidbit of history that you think is super cool that I should know about, or want to know more about, just let me know. Don't feel like you have to answer all of these on the list, but just some thoughts so we can get to know each other a little better. Does anyone want to start? No, it's very like first day of class, sorry.
My favorite local stories is the Wheelwee Cafe. So for 10 years now, we've been swapping stories and telling stories about this local area to folks. And that's why I'm here today, because I'd like to learn more. There's more that I can share with customers, because that was a little bit of a Oregon Trail hotspot. You get a lot of tourists come to the cafe that ask about the Oregon Trail and ask about the local area. When I grew up, my grandma, she had the arrowheads that are downstairs. She had stuff like that exactly on her kitchen.
Love it.
He was really big into it. So I've always liked digging in the dirt myself.
Yeah.
But I have a fun story that's not creepy. The customer that told me about how his family had a homestead that's where Echo Heights is now. And when the Oregon Trail would come out of the blues, it wasn't like single file like they did in the movies, but they would spread out. It would be like a mile-wide dust storm. They would come rolling into the valley, and just how impressive and cool a sight that was.
Yeah.
When the wagon trains came through. Anyway.
Much more formidable that way, yeah.
Yeah, very ominous.
Uh-huh. Anything else? Yeah.
My favorite look field right in front of my house, you can see the ruts. The wheat grows different, and it's fascinating to me, no matter how many ways it's been plowed. The wheat grows a different color and it's shorter. And
right in those ruts, yeah.
And it goes up over the hill, you can see the whole thing. So
very cool.
that's what I like. And I'm a teacher.
I'll go ahead.
No, you go.
One of the cool things I think is our house is actually way back
I can never remember his last name, but it's George something. He's the one who kind of oversaw the construction of the railroad through here. The park is named after him, so I just think that's kind of a cool connection to grow up there. And I believe it's the Golden Spike is what sits above our mantle. So having that kind of reminder each day.
Very cool. Okay. So I'm another history buff by accident because my husband was a history major at U of O, like where she studied. So when he got a job at McNairy Dam, that was exciting because there's a lot of history there. And then when we went looking for a place to live, he saw Echo and he just went bonkers because you could see the ruts.
Yep.
And then for the last, until he passed away, I pretty much like daily had a lecture on where's the ruts
Yep.
and the whole
All the things.
Lewis and Clark and he's over there and his work and like how important Echo actually was, as someone said, in the whole journey.
It is
And it'd be
definitely-
neat to keep our school kids, you know, grow up on that.
Yeah, it's
They know,
definitely a
like,
nexus in
It's
a lot
not
of
just like
ways.
the dolls. and the
Yeah.
dogs or- Even though that's. cool.
Great. Yeah.
I could go for this. Born and raised here. He's from
Won't hold it against him. Okay, yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So kind of really.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that we're kind of working towards, especially with this iteration of the project, right? Because it's been going on since the 80s, if not earlier, but that has been a really key piece and it's really fun. It's some
We're
cool
really
stuff.
lucky to work with some others.
Wonderful, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason, right, that it was such a nexus for the Oregon Trail and those settlers, and it was because Indigenous people here had already kind of had a setup, and that was helpful. Yeah, anyone else want to share? No, I don't want to like compel anybody to participate, but
Lindsay's ruts come over to my family property,
mhm.
and there's a place that we can go in, roast thing,
Okay, yeah.
so,
Mhm.
the horses.
Yeah, very cool. I think I remember reading about, there's all that in the brochure, right? All of the cool spots around Echo for those Oregon Trail nuts that we love. Yeah.
I live in Echo now. I lived in Echo when I was born, and my dad liked Echo so well, he was one of the dam workers. But when it was finished, he had to move, so we moved obviously. But he liked Echo so well that my little sister's name married Echo. So
Lovely.
we're definitely.
Connected to this place. Love it. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I'm so happy to meet you, and I'm so glad that you came this evening, and I'm looking forward to sharing some stuff with you. Let's see. So back to what even is archaeology? What do I do as an archaeologist is often kind of a mystery to some people. Fundamentally, there's a lot of different ways to study human culture and understand human culture. And archaeologists, specifically, we focus on people throughout history, and the source of the information we use is material. So things like ancestral belongings or discarded or broken technologies, remains of buildings, so on, or existing wonderfully preserved buildings. And to better understand all of those material physical remnants, we also include oral histories, written documents like journals, newspapers, things like that, as well as visual records such as drawings or photographs, films even. And we take all of these kind of pieces of the past and put them together as a broad and comprehensive understanding of human culture. And this, just because I have you all here, is one of my pet peeves. Archaeologists don't dig dinosaurs. There's about 60 million years gap between paleontology and archaeology. So anytime I have like the chance, I'm like, PSA, everyone should know. Now we know what archaeology is and what it isn't. You might be wondering why you care, right? I really like this quote by the Society for American Archaeology that says, "The past belongs to everyone, and it's everyone's responsibility to help protect and preserve it." And what I've learned so far in working with your community is that you're all very much on board with this mission. And it's so great that you have those values for preserving and sharing the past as well. But then the question is, even if we can all agree that the past is important, why archaeology, right? Why this way of understanding the past? And the way I see it is it's a matter of perspective. So archaeological methods are unique and provide specific insights that other fields of historical study may not be able to show in the same way. And to kind of demonstrate this, we're going to do a little thought experiment. So take a minute and think about, where do you think the majority of your life's experiences are kind of preserved or held for posterity? Anyone have any thoughts?
Like physical?
Great question. Could be, yeah. So mentally or emotionally, where do those things live potentially? Memories, thoughts, right? So people hold a lot of those things. If you're like me, because I'm a consummate millennial, almost all of those memories, physical manifestations, are living on my phone, right? I've got text messages, I've got notes app things, I've got my photos, right? Those are all those kind of connections to all of those historical moments for me. But the trick here, like your very good point makes clear, the phone is physical, but if archaeologists in the future don't have access to the cloud, they're not going to see all of those memories in the same way that we've interacted with them. So even though I am, joined with my phone at the hip, I do have, right, the shoebox in the closet that's got Polaroids and my graduation tassels and those kinds of things. Folks have photo albums and scrapbooks, right? So if, heaven forbid, my house doesn't burn down in a fire and those things keep coming with me on my moves, archaeologists in future will be able to find those kinds of things and use those to interpret some of my life and what life was like for folks during my time period, our time period. But here's the tricky question. How many of you guys save mementos of bad times? Like failures, right? It's easy to put the graduation tassel in there. What about when you dropped out of college? There's not really a memento to put in the box. Or the wrapper from your McDonald's, or your Amazon boxes from the shopping spree, right? So this is where archaeologists actually find like the good stuff. It's in the trash, because this is the mundane day-to-day of our existence, is those Amazon boxes and is the McDonald's wrappers, or even, the turkey carcass from Thanksgiving, right? And where it ends up eventually gets preserved, and archaeologists can use that data to really understand what life was like, not just through the lens of all the great times, but more comprehensive and nuanced past that is, as we all know, a little more complex when we're living it. And to make sure we're going forward all on the same page, I'm going to take a moment to define 3 terms, and these are legally defined terms, and that's part of our mandate today, is that legal education a little bit. And so if you're interested, this is the Oregon statute 358.905. You can QR code scan that and you'll have all the details. But to start off, for an object to be considered archaeological, it has 3 criteria that it must meet, with age, location, and context. So in Oregon, an archaeological object is 75 years old. It has to be a part of the physical record of either an indigenous or other culture found in the state or waters of Oregon, and it has to constitute material remains from past human life or activity that are of archaeological significance. And if you have a lot of objects together, you get a site or a geographic locality in Oregon that contains those archaeological objects that are contextually associated either with each other or by the area they're in. So like if they're all in the same layer of dirt and they're capped by a big concrete pad, we can know that those are associated with each other, or if they have the same function, right? If it's a trash heap, we know that things were going there because that's where you put things that were in the trash. So significance is kind of a loaded term, because what's significant to me might not necessarily be what's important or significant to each of you in the same way. But when we define archaeological significance, it's based on the National Register of Historic Places criteria, which is a federal system that we use to understand, again, what we value from an archaeological kind of standpoint. And so for an object to be significant, it is typically considered something like a monument, symbols, tools, facilities, or technological or dietary byproducts, right? That turkey carcass that we mentioned. So those kinds of byproducts, if they're in this context, can be considered significant. If a site is to be considered significant, it has to possess important archaeological information or data that is either on a local, regional, or national level, right? So we have to make these connections to that overarching history of either a local place or a bigger place. One thing to note, the federal and like with this National Register, those are federal policies that are kind of informing how the state defines archaeological significance. There's a lot of interplay there, but one of the key differences that I want to point out is Oregon defines archaeological objects as 75 years old, but the federal definition is only 50 years old. And depending on where you are in the context, that will shift. Every state makes their own rules. And part of that, right, is because history keeps happening, right? And so it's hard to know when is it past or important enough to talk about past versus like, that's just my grandma's like knitting stash, right? Like where do we draw that line is tricky. And we'll talk a little bit more about the interplay between these state and federal heritage, but we'll take a quick break because this is kind of dense. Does anyone have any questions about policies, what archaeology is, what I do, things like that? Totally fine if you don't. Also feel free when we have these moments if you want to go snag more snacks. Great.
Does my audio make it back?
Yes, it does. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What do we do if we happen to stumble upon something that might be archaeologically significant?
That is a great question. And I will get into it actually a little bit later. But I also, so there's definitely guidelines, and I would give you the handout if I could, but I'm sure Dave can email it to you. Yeah. Basically, my best practice is leave it where it is. Take a picture. We all have a little walk-in GPS in our pockets these days, mostly. So if you wanted to put a little geotag where you are and leave it where it is, if you can, kick a little more dirt over it so it doesn't move around a bunch. But that's best practice, is to leave it where it is and then tell somebody. So I assume you're up in a fire lookout, you're either on state or federal land. So you'll tell. There's heritage departments. I used to work at the Umatilla Forest Service in their heritage department. Go tell your heritage professionals and they'll make a note. Or if you have other questions, we'll get into it later. The State Historic Preservation Office has a lot of resources as well. So yeah, thanks so much. That is such an important question because we do sometimes just stumble upon things in the wild or in town. So yeah, I want to dive in. Sorry, go ahead.
Just said, thank you.
No worries, you're welcome. So now I want to get into a little bit of background on the site because not everybody, some people, like I know Diane Barry is an expert, but some folks may not know all of the pieces of it. So one of the things is that there's this Smithsonian institution designates every site using the same system of code. And so we call this site 35 UM 84, and 35 is the state, so 35th admitted to the Union. Oregon is state number 35, UM indicates the county, and 84 would be the order in which it was recorded. So this is the 84th site recorded by the state and registered with the Smithsonian in Umatilla County. But before it was given this fun code name, it was known by many other names, and we've heard some of those. And that was based on the interactions that people were having with this place. Much more meaningful, I guess, than, you know, just our random site name. And the Sahaptin language of the Umatilla people, this area in olive green, it's kind of hard to see on the map, but the whole area in green is referred to as Kupa, which translates to Tule place, because tules are so important for folks in this area from an economic standpoint, from a structural standpoint. Tule mats make up your buildings, etc., for indigenous folks. And so this whole area, and again, right, echoes in one spot because we have a specific building type. Indigenous folks who were in this area referred to the whole area because they had a permanent kind of presence here, but there was also this understanding that the river's going to move, so we're going to move as needed. And sometimes the tules are going to pop up here, and we're going to go hang out there, or they're going to pop up downriver a little bit. So those are the flexibility there. So yes, indigenous people, particularly folks belonging to the Umatilla tribe, had a permanent camp in this place for millennia, and it served as this area where other regional groups like Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce, right? There's this big kind of highway going across, especially to Celilo Falls over on the Columbia. And so this was kind of a known rest stop of we're moving through the area. We know folks are going to be there. We can stop, take a minute, rest, swap some stories, swap some food and resources potentially. And settlers from the east benefited from this indigenous presence as they started traveling these routes along the Oregon Trail, and they crossed the lower crossing of the Umatilla River, is what it was known as among Oregon Trail travelers. And they also had this opportunity to kind of rest and resupply. And there's a lot of great stories from indigenous folks, elders talking about how they interacted with settlers, as well as diaries from Oregon Trail folks who mention stopped here. There was one I read that this guy was talking about his wife wanted a dress. His indigenous wife wanted a dress. And so a couple of sisters of this family that were traveling on the Oregon Trail stopped and helped make a dress for this guy's wife. So it was a happening spot. And then as the Oregon Territorial Government started kind of creating a space of control, they chose this location for the very first Indian agency in the territory. Before the treaties were signed, before we had kind of the established reservations from those treaties, the Indian agency was kind of this hopeful place of let's build some relationships, let's do some trade, and specifically with the Umatilla Cayuse folks. And so they picked this spot for the agency. And you'll notice this map refers to the area as Utilla and the Utilla Indians. It's hard to translate things sometimes, right? Things get lost in translation. This map was done by Granville Haller, who was a general in the Yakima War. And so he had different strategic reasons for making this map than potentially other folks who might have needed it. And then, as you all probably know, the Oregon Mounted Volunteers built a fort at this same spot where the agency had been, and regrouped there periodically throughout that time frame in the early months of the Yakima War, mostly during winter. I imagine it was cold and it was nice to go hang out somewhere where you knew you had materials to build a fire. And then after the signing of the treaty in 1855, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation was formed as a group, and they ceded these lands and this Tule place in exchange for certain guaranteed rights. And this facilitated the ranching, cultivation, and all the enterprises that popped up in Echo that are still so important to your community today. Thinking back, we remember those criteria for an archaeological site. We can now tell this is significant, not only on a local level, but also a state, regional, and national level. So this is a really cool site in that it fits all those criteria. It's really awesome. What we don't know yet is data potential, right? How much information is there potentially in this place that we might learn about? And so you've seen some of this. If you're from here, you probably saw a lot of those artifacts on display in those display cases. Most of those are associated with the Indian Agency era or the fort era. Some of you might have been around to participate in the digs that happened in the 80s. Most of the artifacts that we have that were excavated from the site were collected under the supervision of Dr. John and his wife Sharon Woodward. And actually their son Adam helped out a lot too. And they were from Portland. He was a teacher at Mount Hood Community College. And that was throughout the latter half of the 1980s when a lot of that excavation was done. And John and his family, and mostly a lot of community college students, he brought in folks from Blue Mountain Community College and Mount Hood to help out. And they excavated thousands of artifacts from this site. And a lot of those never made it to the display cases, which is where I've come in. And my team has been reanalyzing thousands of artifacts that were in storage boxes to see what else we can learn from the site and how we can share new stories about the site with everybody. And now I'm going to share 4 examples of some cool artifacts we found and how we kind of think through what these artifacts mean, so you can get an idea of what we do. So probably like one of the first things Dave and I talked about was, you got to talk to Diane Barry. And I said, yes, sir, will do. And I went and we had a long chat. And one of the things she kind of mentioned offhand was when they were starting to locate the site, folks were telling her, you're looking in the wrong place. That's where the fur farm was. That's not where the agency or the fort was. And they mentioned specifically that it was a mink fur farm, because in the early 20th century, mink coats were all the rage, and got lots more popular. And at the time, I was like, that's an interesting tidbit, Diane, thank you. I'll make a note. But then, as I was looking through artifacts, I found some skeletons that looked like little rodents. And I was like, what are the odds that these might be mink? And so I'm not an expert in animal bones, because archaeologists often specialize so we can know what we know. And so we consulted with one of our zoo archaeologists, who is someone who specializes in animal bones and archaeology. And she was able to confirm that these are, in fact, baby mink. It was a litter of at least 5 mink kits. And we don't know necessarily why or how this little litter of minks died, but it's cool. We have material confirmation. Minks are not like native to this area, so they are definitely brought in for some reason. These might have been minks that like got loose and went rogue and had babies somewhere else. So it might not have been directly associated with the fur farm, but it is material evidence that all those folks were like, you're looking in the wrong place, might have been right, and it's just not the wrong place, and they happen to overlap. So that is really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing if there's any other kinds of evidence that we can connect to that fur farm. Number 2, if you've seen those artifacts from the fort era, you probably remember seeing a lot of lead ball and mini ball ammunition out there. It's very classic, like Civil War era stuff too, if you're a Civil War history buff. As technology developed from that mid-19th century timeframe into the early 20th century, the arms and ammunition also started changing, and the popularity of specific types, right, started changing. And throughout several different areas of the site, we're seeing a lot of different shotgun shell bases. And they date from around mid-1870s through 1950. And the earliest dating one we have is this 20 gauge head that was probably the paper casing type with the metal head. And it's from the Union Metallic Cartridge Company. And in the 1870s, UMC was the leading manufacturer of all ammunition in the US. And coincidentally, the 70s was also when shotgun use and popularity started going up. And so the company obviously was meeting that increasing demand. And so we know, based on records, that this shell would have been made sometime after 1873, because that's when they shifted from making only all brass shell casings to the ones that also had the paper, which were more affordable. And then it must have been before 1910, because in 1910, they merged with Remington Arms to form this massive ammunition conglomerate. Then we have 3 12 gauge shells that were made by different companies from about the mid 1920s through 1950s. And you can see this one has made in USA on there. And that is one of those kind of slight changes in manufacturing info that can give us clues to dates. So we know that in the mid 20s, early 30s is when there was this large shift to making a point of saying that things were made in the US rather than overseas. And so that gives us a date there. This one is before that because it doesn't have the made in USA yet. So that's one of those fun little puzzles. So just out of curiosity, how many of y'all have shotguns at home? Yeah. So when you buy ammunition, what do you pick? You buy one specific brand? No. Why? Tell me more, Phil. Cost, whatever's on sale. Okay, so affordability is the key piece. Okay, so the kind of load, yep, that makes sense. So on these, right, the load is indicated by these fun brand names, the Expert, the Defiance, Nitro Club, and so on. But the big thing here, right, is as consumers, we all make choices when we make purchases, right? And it's either cost, affordability, or availability, right? If we don't have access to our favorite brand, we'll get the store brand or whatever. Quality might be another thing, right? You know that's a reliable brand, not necessarily another one. And so this sample that we're seeing, we're not seeing any kind of brand loyalty, which makes sense, right? If we're all buying based on what's affordable, we're gonna pick whatever is cheap at the time. This could also mean, right, so there's kind of two interpretations directionally that we could do with archaeology. Either this means that there are families who have brand loyalty and one family's buying Western, one family's buying UMC or Remington, and one family's buying US Cartridge Company, and they just happen to move, right? It's an 80-year period. So it could be that those folks are buying those things and they just happen to move. So we're seeing different interpretations there. Or it's that those choices are being made more based on price and affordability and availability than it is a kind of brand loyalty. And that's something that is, again, one of those ways that we analyze artifacts, is to try and understand why people are making choices in the past and what's informing those choices. And when we contextualize, right, like just the shells by themselves don't mean very much, but when we start thinking about how people today interact with their stuff, and when we use documents about what was available at the general store in Echo in the time, right, we might get a better idea of why things that we're seeing in the record are the way they are. Third example, do we have any collectors or gearheads or kiddos that might recognize what this artifact is? I'll give you a hint. You should look right here. See if you can read anything there. Yep, that's a Hot Wheels car. And so this was the classic Cord miniature, and it was only sold by Mattel in 1971 and 1972. And it came with this collector's button of the wheel. And it also had these really cool play features of the removable plastic roof, which ours clearly is missing its roof. And the hood also was liftable, so you could see the whole engine block. And ours, we have full engine block exposure. We have lost the hood. So how did I learn that? Again, I'm not a collectible car expert. That's not my bag, but collectors, let me tell you, they are experts. They know things. And so we browsed all of these Hot Wheels collector websites, and we were able to identify this specific model. If we get in really close, you can see that it says classic Cord on there, so that's helpful as well. But then when we try to figure out color, it gets a little tricky. So we know these are two of the colors produced, and it's probably one of those. But the question becomes, hot pink, according to collectors, oh, nope, just kidding. Hot pink is very rare. So collectors are not seeing that available very often, whereas the light purple is just hard to find. When you guys look at this, which one do you think? Because it's tricky, it's corroded, we have a lot of paint loss. Do we think it's our very rare hot pink, or is it potentially light purple? Could be, right? So the wheel wells, we hope, we want it to be worth money, right? We'll sell that, auction it off for Echo, it'll be great. But yeah, so it's one of these tricky things. It could be hot pink. It's hard to tell, but it could also be that light purple. It's one of those kind of, doesn't change necessarily our interpretation, but it's a fun thing to contemplate. Is this very rare? And we happen to have something that's super cool. And what's also interesting about this object, when it was dug up in the 80s, it was not archaeologically significant, right? But now we're looking at this collection and it's over 50 years old, and it is now an archaeological object. And it gives us new information, right? Because history, as I said, it keeps on marching on. So kiddos were playing in this same area where all of these big epic kind of history book things were also happening. And I think that's a really fun kind of reminder that there might have been kids at the Indian Agency. There might have been, like, the kids are there throughout the past. We just don't always see them. So at least in the material record, or we don't talk about them in the history books. So it's a fun one. And so these are just a couple examples of the 1980s artifacts that we've been looking through. And there were actually over 5,000 artifacts excavated between 1984 and 1989. So you might think that's plenty. You've gotten all you need to know, Megan. You don't need to excavate more. But it turns out in 2023, when Anderson Perry had folks on site making sure that the flood remediation we weren't losing any archaeology data as part of that process, we actually found, even on just the edges of the site, because out by the river is barely, like, that's not the center of the site itself. There's still some really cool stuff to find, which is our fourth example. So this bottle was found broken into lots of fragments around 3 feet underground. And this is the actual physical puzzle of putting together this broken bottle is always a fun trick for me. And when we look at the overall shape, once it's mended, we can see it's a pretty typical prescription bottle. So there's this rectangular paneled design. It has a sloped kind of arched shoulder, and there would have been a very thin neck and little mouthpiece on top with a little stopper that would have gone in there. And when we're looking at it, we're not seeing any writing on the sides of the bottle. If we did see writing on the sides, it might be something like Dr. Pierce's Golden Remedy. Those patent medicines were very invested in their marketing. So they made sure it was in the bottle, on the paper, it was everywhere. So because we don't see any of that kind of embossing, this bottle was probably used more for like compounding pharmaceuticals. Your pharmacist would have stuff on hand and you'd come in and tell them, doc, I feel not great, I'm congested, et cetera. Same way your pharmacist now will point you to the Sudafed or whatever, right? But in those days, they would have all of the remedies and they'd mix up your little bottle of stuff and send you home with your own prescription. And so this is probably what this bottle was used for, because it doesn't have any of those fancy details. The other thing that we often look for, right, so we don't know necessarily what was in the bottle, but we might be able to find out when the bottle was made or who made the bottle. And we usually look on the bottom of a bottle. This is the base. We usually look at the bottom because that's where maker's marks show up for who actually made the bottle. In this case, though, we have a mark, but it doesn't tell us very much information yet. So we have these two W's facing each other that one is kind of fainter than the other, and it's kind of off center, which makes me think that was not the on-purpose W. The on-purpose W was probably here. But turns out, before we had fancy bottle making machines, people had to make them by hand. And they had these molds that were typically hinged. And so one person would hold the mold closed and another person would blow the glass into the mold. And then after it had cooled, you'd unhinge the mold and take the bottle and move along. And so, of course, when you have people working very quickly on trying to make as many bottles as they can, there's going to be some error that occurs. So probably what happened here was there was a little blob of glass stuck from another bottle or something, or it got printed and then he had to readjust and scooch it back in the mold correctly. So we got a double W print. So that's a fun, just like, difference in how bottles are made and exist. But even if we're just trying to solve this puzzle of like, okay, what's the W mean? What does that W tell us? We get into another puzzle. Luckily, the Society for Historical Archaeology has tons of research on historical bottles, and they actually have published that there are 4 different companies that could have used this as their maker's mark. But it's a little bit wibbly wobbly. So a lot of pharmaceutical bottles are attributed to the Whitney Glass Company that have a W for Whitney on the bottom, but there's no documentation in like the Whitney Company records that say, yep, we put W's on the bottom of our bottles to say that they're ours. The W has also been observed on medicinal bottles manufactured by Winslow Glass. But that's typically more associated with their circular medicine bottles with the specific medicine for Karuna. But people have also observed it on these kinds of rectangular ones and attributed it to Winslow. So it could be that. And then they also list 2 other possible firms that could have used this, which include Weeks and Gilson, which they operated a branch of South Stoddard Glass Company, or it could have been Thomas Whiteman and Company. So there's a lot of uncertainty still. And the authors at the Bottle Research Group say that, quote, attaching a W mark alone to any one company should be regarded as a risky identification. But you know what? We're gonna take the risk. I'm gonna make a risky identification because if we can pin down what this is, right, it can tell us not only a little bit about this bottle, but it can tell us it's all 3 feet below surface, right? The plow is probably not churning up all the way 3 feet down, so that's pretty much intact. So if we can figure out how old this bottle is, it can give us kind of an inference for how old everything else in around 3 feet deep in that spot is. So usually when stuff is deeper in the ground, it's older because it all stacks up on top of itself. So that fact that it's all the way 3 feet down is part of what tells me which direction I'm gonna go in. So even though we know Winslow has some of the best documentation, it only used this mark between 1900 and 1911. And that seems a little too recent to me. I'm like, that's not 3 feet deep. And so I'm inclined to say that it was Whitney Glass, which is a little broader date range, and it puts us back into the 1880s. And I'd buy that. Interestingly, the folks who worked at Anderson Perry went with the Thomas Whiteman and Company. And these, again, like, this is archaeology. Those are both well-educated, well-informed guesses, but ultimately that's all we're doing a lot of the time. We can only know what we know. And so even though we don't always end up with a definitive answer, we get to ponder this fun puzzle. And that's part of why I love archaeology is it's just puzzles. It's just little puzzles. Anyone have any questions or comments about this stuff that we've seen, looked at? I love your story about like the full bank of wagons coming at you, because I can imagine, like, I'm thinking of the first folks who were living at Koopa, and you see not just a nice little orderly line of wagons coming at you, but you have a huge wall of dust. You're like, oh my goodness, what is this? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting. There's so much that sticks around. Like, we have so much metal, so many metal artifacts, and they're the hardest to identify because corrosion eats away so much of them. One of my friends has a really cool project. She excavated her family's blacksmith shop in central Idaho. And because it was corroded, it was really tricky to see. There was a lot of rust all over it. And you can use an X-ray to see what metal is actually left in all of the rust. And so there are things like that just look like a big glob of metal rust, but when you put it on an X-ray, all of a sudden the old scissors or tool that was in there lights up and you can tell, oh, that's what it was. It's also really great because we're running into this problem. You guys are very fortunate. You have a wonderful storage space that has been climate controlled and cared for, but it's really hard when you have thousands of artifacts. For a lot of communities and museums, they have not storage space that's suitable, and especially for metal that just loves to oxidize and corrode, you've got to have certain conditions. And so a lot of organizations that are running low on space are switching to, what if we just X-ray it all? That gives us as much information as we're going to get from it in many regards, and then we can repurpose the metal for other things if we need to. So that's one of those fun new techniques that's coming up. Anyone have any other questions or comments?
I have one.
Yeah.
So, Megan, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes.
My name's Mike. Question is, you mentioned digitizing thousands of artifacts. Excuse me, I'm gonna cancel this.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're doing is cataloging, and so we are describing what it is. We're kind of classifying what its most likely functional use was. And so we're going to be, all of these are getting kept and they come back to Echo. They're not, none of these are going anywhere. But so that other folks can know without having to go through all the boxes, they can look at this delightful spreadsheet with lots of details and they can find out. And if other archaeologists are, for instance, looking at, I want to know about fort daily life and the kinds of food that people were eating. They could potentially come and look at this catalog and say, okay, where's all the bones? Show me all the different kinds of bones, which bones have cut marks on them. And then they know which catalog numbers to go through and pull to do their research. And it makes this not only, right, again, it's a very cool thing that your community gets to have, and then now it's getting more useful potentially to other folks so we can learn even more things. So that's one of the pieces of digitization. We also are doing normal, like kind of 2D photographs with really nice lighting and high contrast, so we can just see what we're looking at without having to, again, go through the boxes. And then lastly, I have, for the curriculum specifically, one of my students is working on what's called photogrammetry, and she will basically do a 3D rendering of an object by taking hundreds of pictures from all the angles, and that allows us to make a 3D digital model of it, and then we can even 3D print it if we want to. So there's some things like in the collection that are just super special and can't leave here. They will always stay in those display cases, but it'll be really fun because we can 3D print them and send them out to the schools, and students can still have something to look at and touch and better understand that piece of history. So those are some of the ways that we've been digitizing recently. Yeah.
You said that things go on.
Yes.
Like in one place to be.
Yes. For sure. So one of the things that I'm noticing with, especially the stuff that was excavated in the 80s, they did not get super deep. And part of that is because it gets harder and harder to dig as you get below that disturbed soil. And because the Ramos family had their alfalfa field there, that's been plowed quite a few times. What's really cool about plowing is while it does change the vertical association within that till zone, studies have shown it doesn't, like if we're looking at the XY axis, it's not moving things left, right, or forward and back super much. It's just up and down a little bit. And so that's why plowing is not the worst thing to have happen to an archaeological site, honestly, because pretty much all of the locations are similar and plows don't go right super, super deep. So things like that bottle that are 3 feet down are still there. And that was what was really cool when Anderson Perry came in, is they were actually able to get much deeper excavations to try and get a little more context. And if I had to guess, I'd guess Dr. Woodward was staying rather shallow because he had a lot of community college students. And let me tell you, it's really hard to teach people when you don't find things. And so having just like find the good stuff, let them touch and experience as much as they can and learn how to dig the square holes was probably the goal. And they were also trying to like locate where the fort actually was. So they were more looking for features like post holes or other kinds of not artifact specific things to figure out, yeah, where the blockhouse was, which we now know, and all of those things. So yeah, great. Any other questions? Folks online? Yeah.
You gotten through all the artifacts?
Not quite. I have, one of my techs has been in the lab pretty much every day all summer so far since she got back on her contract. And she has been doing a ton. She finally just got through 1989. So all of the ones that we know how old, when they were excavated, we have cataloged. We have probably about, I'd say 1,000 more to go that we don't have as detailed information about. They're all very much like from the site and have important, cool things. There's a lot of animal bones that I'm really intrigued to see what those tell us. But those are, yeah, we're definitely blasting through them. But we'll be done by the end of the summer, I think, is my guess. And then, yeah, get a report of all the little, basically a lot of these 4 slides about artifacts, but on a much bigger scale of all those different things. And eventually I will probably make it in a more, that's part of the curriculum too, is there's going to be these activities with certain artifacts and certain documents that can help students kind of engage with, these are nails from this old time period. What were those nails for? How did they, come into being? And we have so many nails that we have enough that we can send real nails out. We'll chemically stabilize them so they don't keep rusting. And then kids can handle actual artifacts and connect in that way. Because that's the other thing. I'm a stuff person. My house has KitchenAid because I like stuff. And so I think that's one of the other reasons I really like archaeology is it's this, someone else in the past touched this. They hammered it into a board to build the Indian Agency building, and all of those things kind of connect through time. And we reused a lot of those nails because once the Indian Agency burned down, those nails were probably fine. Someone picked them up when they were hoeing the field and said, I can use that in the workshop. Yeah.
So is someone of the tribes kind of working with you on this?
Yes.
That is invested in it because they all kind of moved up to, there.
Yeah, they're mostly out.
They've got an archaeologist that sort of like pairs with you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the big components with, yeah, the memorandum of agreement that Dave mentioned earlier. All of the tasks, honestly, that I've been subcontracted to do are basically because the tribe has asked, like I was talking about, right? There's all of those things the tribe said, hey, there's all that stuff from the 80s. What's that all about? Can you guys find someone to tell us more about it, right? And so that's part of why we're doing this. And they requested the curriculum, not just for Echo School District, but also Pendleton School District, because it's their history too, right? The Nikyawi Community School, those kids are like, that's their community.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the other pieces I'm really excited about is sharing more of the story with more folks.
So Margaret, part of when we did the flood repairs that we were allowed to do around Echo.
Yeah.
Down on the Williams property and Linda's and along the bridge and along the other side to keep Gina's house from falling in the river.
Yeah.
Part of that was we had to either pull the rocks back out, which defeated the purpose of keeping the river out of houses, or do some of these other things. It's called mitigation.
And we're
so
gonna
the mitigation part that is that Anderson and Perry and I worked together for a lot of years now, and we were able to, the University of Idaho stepped up to the plate to come and do this project. So that's kind of like the part of it. I kind of make some more like jokes about it. It's like my punishment for the rocks. But Megan has kind of turned it out of punishment into actually do the project. And so, but that is kind of the deal, is that if we were going to leave the rocks in the river, we needed to do these projects. And I know Carrie that works at the tribe, I work with her in parks. I know a lot of these people anyway from my previous life. And so it worked out pretty well that we were able to get together, and the agencies from the Corps, the DSL, everybody's involved in this. It's not just Echo, it's a conglomerate. Yeah.
And a perfect transition. So one of the questions, our last guiding question is how do we preserve these things like this? We know it's there, but also folks live there. So how do we continue to preserve this so we make sure that it's available to learn from for future generations and that it doesn't fall in the river, because that's no fun. To answer what can you do to protect this valuable history for your community, turns out you just follow state and federal laws. They're there on purpose to help us make sure we're keeping it all taken care of. And so unsurprisingly, the best possible way to preserve an archaeological site is just to avoid it. Go around it, right? Don't mess with it. Don't plow on it, right? All of those things would be in a perfect ideal world, we just wouldn't touch archaeological stuff. But that's silly. Gina lives there, right? The Rittenhouse family has alfalfa they need to grow. So There's regulations for what's called continued use, such as plowing, grazing, gardening, right? Mowing your lawn. None of these things drastically damage the site. They're, like we talked about, there's only a little bit of up-down shift, not any XY shift, or left-right. And so these continued use actions are, they don't need permits. They don't, you just keep doing them. They're allowed. However, anything that might seriously impact the site, like Dave mentioned, putting a bunch of rocks in there, or the flood taking out a bunch of dirt, right? Like that's a potential risk for losing information, and we need to figure out how to address that. And so the kinds of things that this require these kinds of permittings are any construction. So throwing in a shed, a barn, pole barns especially are a reminder that people are like, I'm not pouring a foundation. I'm like, but you're digging a hole. And then if you're changing a path for a road or a driveway, things like that. If you're installing or maintaining utilities, irrigation, fencing, things like that. Dumping a lot of stuff on it, right? So when we were talking about the deeper it is, the older it is. And if we import 5 feet of fill on top, it changes how we interpret how old stuff is, because it seems we might assume that that happened naturally, but it didn't. And then trampling or kind of heavy animal use in a way that we're not planning on, is not normal grazing, and then as well as tracking. So even if you're not planning to bring the backhoe in and dig in the site, if you're tracking those cat tracks over the site, can also cause issues because of the weight of that machinery. So while the plow isn't as big a deal because it's moving the dirt as it's compacting, bigger heavy equipment can become an issue. And so I think of this all as the irregular ground disturbance. It's not your everyday thing that you're continuing to use. And those I kind of also think of as grandfathered in, right? As soon back in the past, when it was still an archaeological site, plowing was happening over 50 years ago. So it's a continued use. It's been grandfathered into what is ongoing use for the site. But if you're doing something beyond that, permitting through the State Historic Preservation Office is necessary. And as part of that process, a professional archaeologist has to come in, and Anderson Perry were the folks who had their archaeologists come in as part of that work to first determine if there's anything significant there that needs to be protected. And if it is there, what do we do to either minimize? Can we change the way the project is laid out so we don't get right into the middle of the site? Or can we mitigate the damage? As Dave said, okay, so the damage is unavoidable or it's already done, right? Like the flood took it all. There's nothing we can't go back and put it in. So how do we offset the loss of information that could have been done? We go back and we look at the old stuff and see what new information we can get there. And then just so we cover all the bases, the big never allowed no-nos, 3 big categories. 1, never allowed to intentionally excavate, alter, destroy an archaeological site or remove objects from private property without a permit. SHPO's there, they have the thing. 2, can't remove or destroy a burial site, human remains, or tribally sacred objects. And 3, unless you have already been authorized by a particular tribe, having or displaying any native artifacts, human remains, or anything taken from a burial site that is not consistent with what's permitted under state laws is also a no-no. And again, QR code, all the rules are there if you want to know if you're on the board. It's also keeping in mind, like, no one here is enforcing this, right? Like, I'm just here, I gotta tell you what the rules are. That's what we're doing. So at the end of the day, these boil down to, if you're not sure if it's archaeological or if you should act, like, if you need a permit, it's better to ask than assume that it's fine. So I like to say, call before you dig is not just for your utility safety, it's also for your archaeological safety. And so you can reach out. There's 2 big offices for state contacts: the Oregon Historic Preservation Office, the State Historic Preservation Office, we call it SHPO in the biz. And then if you aren't sure if you need a permit or need a permit, they will walk you through the process. They're the go-to there. And then the Oregon Legislative Commission on Indian Services, if you're not sure, everyone here is pretty familiar with CTUIR, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. But there's actually, depending on, right, tribes weren't always on the res. So they moved around a lot. And so Warm Springs or Nez Perce might also be interested in certain projects in certain areas because there's known documentation of their people moving through that area as well. And so OLIS is the office to go to if you're not sure, or LCIS, sorry. LCIS is who you would ask about because they have all that connection and communication. So then going back to, those were all state rules, which because private land is typically state policies, sometimes federal stuff comes into effect as well. In this case, for the property and this site, because some of the work was below what's called the ordinary high water line, it was in Army Corps permitting area because they manage all of our big waterways, thanks to all of those dams. And so with those, I kind of think is federal laws are like the trump card. So state permitting is always necessary, but if federal compliance comes into play, then we only have to worry about federal policies. State is kind of redundant at that point. So for this case, that was where Army Corps came into play. And there's two big key things that I want to share with you guys about the big things to think about federally. So the first is foundational to the way the United States happened, especially geographically in this part of the world, and that's treaty rights. So when these tribes signed over, they signed their treaties, and it wasn't just like a gift, right? It wasn't have all the land, you're welcome, bye. It was in exchange. There was an understanding for we're going to get certain compensation. We're going to have continued access to certain areas and certain things. And one of those requirements has been kind of grouped into current development processes as this right to consultation. And so to your very astute point, tribes have to be involved, especially because those agreements are between the federal government and the tribes. And so if the federal government's involved, there has to be consultation between whatever agency and the tribes that are in that area. The other specific thing is, it's called Section 106, and it's from the National Historic Preservation Act, which was signed in 1966. And it outlines this not just consultation in general, it has a very specific process for how you identify the historic properties that could be at risk for a project. You assess all of those potential adverse effects and then resolve them in a manner that satisfies all parties. So that's all that work that Dave has done and Anderson Perry has done, lots of consultation and conversations with all those different groups, the state and Army Corps and the tribe, figuring that all out. And then they end up, right, having that agreement. This is the mitigation that we're going to do. And so in this case, right, ECHO hired Anderson Perry, and then Anderson Perry hired us to help with all of that. And full circle, we have the whole story. So those are all the rules and resources, just so you have them. You might wonder, so what's in it for me? These are cool policies, and that's great. But there's actually a couple ways that historical properties and archaeological sites can benefit you as private landowners or the community overall. One of those options is called a conservation easement or a preservation deed covenant. And that's basically you retain your private property rights, but you can have it, you limit development for all future purposes so that you know the site is not going to be dramatically changed. We're not going to put a housing development on top of it. It's staying conserved. There's over at Lindsay Prairie, there's a lot of acreage in that area that are conservation easements. And then another option is to list the property on the National Register of Historic Places, like the 10 buildings in our city of Echo here. This one's on the National Register as well. And that is more about the tax breaks and the kind of public outreach of it all. There's not necessarily, I mean, it helps preserve ongoing, but it doesn't, it's more about we have 10 buildings on the National Register. We have preserved our community in a way, so it's more about kind of historic pride than it is necessarily the same kind of conservation pitch. But what's really cool is that both of these opportunities do offer tax incentives, and it continues to publicize how important these sites are and protect them. So I have lots more details if anybody's curious about that. But yeah, that's pretty much all of my main things. I really appreciate your attention, and we can open the floor to any other questions. Disclaimer, right? I'm not a representative of the state, federal, or any tribal governments. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't necessarily answer all the questions, but if it's in the archaeology ballpark, I'm game. So yeah, thank you all so much. There's handouts up here for kind of all of those private lands rules in an easy option if that's something you're curious about having. But yeah, that's what we're going. So yes, absolutely. So
Kids that want to get involved, okay, because they got involved in trees.
yep, you've got the tree cities. Yeah, absolutely. So the three big things that the tribe has asked for are reanalyze the 80s stuff and make it more accessible and useful for all kinds of researchers. The second one is make a curriculum for local schools. And so I'm gonna get in touch with Lindsay more. I've been chatting with the Matt Yoshika, who's the curriculum director over in Pendleton as well. And so we have some stuff in the works. I'm planning on primarily doing 4th grade because, as you mentioned, that's when we do local history in Oregon state policies. So getting into several, probably 3 or 4 lessons that teachers can incorporate that are hopefully easy peasy. And then I was just chatting with y'all's librarian, whose name has just left my brain, Anna, chatting with Anna about getting some actual, like those 3D printed things and those actual artifacts in a box that can then go throughout all the Sage Library Consortium if folks want to check it out from your library. So we're going to figure out some cool options, and I'm definitely going to work with Lindsay to make sure that I'm not super off base on what 4th graders need to know.
No, they go do the tree.
Yeah.
And then they also. Because they.
Yeah, all of these things are right here. Yeah, and it's a really fun, it's hard, yeah, that whole kind of what is archaeology moment, it's hard. And it's like I was saying, like touching stuff, being able to play with things from the past, either copies or real things from the past, really is fun for kiddos. So, yeah.
So do you think there's more Indian Agency or Fort Henrietta artifacts still out there to be found, or?
I think, yeah, I wish I had, I will definitely show you guys. The excavations that were done in the 80s barely touched the corner. They're pretty sure they caught one corner of the fort blockhouse. And so they caught this corner, and the rest of the fort goes back into Gina's property. And because they would have set it kind of up away from, they didn't want to get the fort flooded either. So it's kind of up and back a little bit. I would say probably the majority of it is still up there and under there. And it's one of those catch-22s of archaeology, right? When we dig it, it's gone. You can't re-dig it. It comes out and then it's out. And so that's part of why the biggest priority is to leave it be. For the most part, that's what preserves it. And we can learn more. You know, Gina decides to sell her property. There was a lot of conversation. I've read a lot of the stuff with Diane. There was a lot of talk about potentially purchasing the property to have it as like a site for the Oregon Trail, kind of federal.
She's got a drinking sign there still, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot there. There's the signs and everything. The question was like, could you, like other sites like the Coral Springs, right? There's not anything developed there.
Yeah.
And so like there could have, the possibilities are endless really, right? If we find the right funding, it could go any direction you want. You could make your own little Fort Henrietta theme park. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to preserve and interpret, and more we're kind of shifting towards what can we do virtually, right? Because the Oregon Trail buffs will always come out here and they'll always read those signs, but the Gen Z kiddos, they don't love going on the road trips in the same way. So I'm working on a website as well to kind of help also teachers can't always, right? Can't do field trips from all over Umatilla County to Echo necessarily. That's hard with funding. But if we can kind of bring the site to those classrooms, that'll be another way to share it.
We have
So.
a.
Mhm.
Historic stuff just came.
Yeah, the audio tour. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Mhm. Yep. There's definitely.
You also have to learn the Black Museum.
Yes, you do. That was one of the things Dave and I have chatted. We have like only so much funding and I only have so much time. It's always a problem, right? Dang it. But when the artifacts come back to those cases, they're gonna come back in more stabilized condition because some of those metal things were still just trying to leave us in the cases. So those are gonna get stabilized. And we'll add some other things. Diane had already done an amazing job with all of those newsletters and kind of getting interpretation in there. So there will be a little bit kind of new and different in those cases. And then, yeah, I'm always up game for writing a grant and doing something there. I know these artifacts has also been on loan to the Umatilla County Historical Society Museum in Pendleton. So some of these artifacts have been in exhibits in the area already for multiple years. So yeah, it's a really cool thing. Like I honestly am kind of floored how few people know about this site and how it's such a big deal, right? It's like every big moment in the American West, you can tick a box for Echo. And so got to get it out there to people beyond just the people who are doing their Oregon Trail pilgrimage, right? We gotta teach more people about it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But
And yeah, email me.
I will. Yeah, I know it's tricky. Again, both my parents were teachers, so I'm like, summer is off limits, but like, we'll jump on it.
One of us will go, one.
That works. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I did it like
No worries, no worries. She did text me. She was like, I'm not gonna make it. I was like, it's all good, Diane. You know most of what I'm talking about, and I'll show you the YouTube video later. We got it. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Yeah. It's tricky too, because like if you